I grew up in a house with 8 chairs around a dining table, but not once did all 8 of us sit down together. Matthew often sat alone at the dining table, his legs swinging under the cold surface. In the worn-tiled kitchen, the fluorescent light buzzed overhead, a familiar, weary hum echoing the house's emptiness, far too spacious for his quiet presence. Every dinner, he placed a plate in front of himself, sometimes reheated spaghetti, sometimes a dry leftover sandwich from the fridge, and pretended someone was there with him. He didn't imagine the cozy scene from movies. He simply forced a smile, hoping he could convince himself that this was fine. But it wasn't fine, and he had known that long before anyone else might have guessed. Back in elementary school, Matthew once drew a family picture during art class. The teacher smiled at his depiction of 6 people sitting around a table with roast chicken, garlic bread, and candlelight. But in truth, he had copied it from an old comic book. Deep down, he had never witnessed a scene like that. When the teacher asked, "Is this your family?" Matthew hesitated, then nodded. He went home feeling like he just told a lie, a sticky, uncomfortable kind of lie that clung to him like dry glue. Each night, he heard his father's car pull up around 1 a.m. The door creaked open, heavy footsteps, the jingle of keys, and then silence until morning. Matthew never dared leave his room, though sometimes he really wanted to, just to say, "I'm here, Dad." But he never did. There was something in his father's tired eyes, in the way he slumped at the dining table, without touching the sandwich Mom left for him, that told Matthew there was no room for a child at that hour. His mother was absent in a different way. She was there, physically, but it was as if she'd forgotten how to look her son in the eyes and ask anything not related to homework or laundry. Every time Matthew tried to share something small, like getting an A on an essay or making a new friend at school, she would simply respond, "That's good." It wasn't that she didn't love him. He knew she did. But that love felt like a neatly folded blanket in the back of a closet. Still there, but no one ever brought it out. He remembered his 8th birthday. He laid all his toys on the table, gave each stuffed animal a name, and waited. His mom texted to say she was stuck at the gas station. His dad messaged that the car broke down on the way home. His sister sent a cake emoji. It was just him and a small store-bought cake, candlelit, singing happy birthday to himself. He blew out without making a wish, because even wishing felt like a waste. Some nights, he dreamed of arguments happening in the kitchen, not real ones, but imagined. He created whole conversations in his head, with family members arguing about dinner, whose turn it was to do the dishes, or how Dad forgot to buy milk. Those ordinary conflicts seemed more real to him than a family that never sat down together to say anything at all. The silence in his house wasn't peaceful. It was a kind of emptiness disguised behind busy schedules. The words, "Dad's working, Mom's tired, and maybe another day." One day at school, the teacher asked him to write an essay, the most memorable dinner you've ever had. Matthew stared at the blank page for 20 minutes. He remembered dinners at his friend's house, where his mom placed hot lasagna on the table, and his dad asked about soccer practice. Those small, seemingly unimportant moments had become his anchor, his quiet dream. To be seen at the dinner table, not for being in trouble or for being tested, but simply because someone cared. In the end, Matthew handed in a blank page. The teacher called him aside and gently asked, "You don't remember any dinner at all?" He smiled and tried to keep his voice calm. "No, sir. Maybe I'll write it when I have one like that for real." The teacher nodded, slightly surprised. But no one knew that this 8-year-old had already begun convincing himself that he didn't need something that, for him, simply didn't exist. Matthew didn't grow up hating his family. He had no concrete reason for resentment. No one hit him. No one abandoned him. But the way they lacked each other, quietly, consistently, shaped him into someone who didn't know how to sit next to someone without feeling like he didn't belong. He wasn't afraid of loneliness. He was used to it. What scared him most was the idea that one day he might build a family just like his own, full of people, but empty at the core. 15 years isn't just a stretch of time. It's a transformation. When Matthew left that house on a September morning, he didn't think he'd be gone for so long. He just thought he needed to leave. He needed a space wide enough that he wouldn't hear the clink of cold dishes from dinners eaten alone, a gap long enough to forget that he once tried to piece together a family out of fragments. For 15 years, he lived like a man lost who knew exactly how lost he was. Temporary apartments, jobs that didn't ask for commitment, relationships that never made it past breakfast, all unconsciously chosen, it seemed, to avoid ever being present. Present at a meal, present in someone's memory, present in the responsibility of loving someone. He never called, never came back for the holidays, never replied to the short, repetitive messages his mother sent. "Are you doing okay?" Though she had never once asked. "Are you happy?" He used to believe that time, given enough length, would close everything, that if you let it pass, a wound would become a scar. But he was wrong. The wound never turned to scar tissue. It just sank deeper, embedding itself in everything he did, until every meal became a monologue. Even surrounded by people, he always felt like he was sitting at a 6-person table with just one occupant, himself. The news of his father's death hit, like a harsh chord crashing through a quiet ballad. It wasn't a shock. It wasn't a tragedy. It was a blow straight to a place he thought he had locked away. His brother's message was brief. "Dad passed away this morning. Mom's not saying anything. I don't know what to do." He stared at that text for nearly an hour, unable to reply, not because of hatred. He didn't feel that, but because no word felt right enough to start with. His heart was like a long-abandoned room. No wind, no light, no voices. Just memories gathering dust on old shelves. Nothing broken, but nothing usable anymore. Matthew didn't go back that day. He stayed up all night in a chair, gripping a cold cup of coffee, staring at the blank wall, not because he didn't know what to do, but because every thought was blocked by a wall named "You No Longer Belong There." He booked a flight the next morning, packed lightly, just a small duffel, an old notebook, and an invisible weight he couldn't name, like he was about to face a part of his past he had buried as deep as he could. The flight back to Oregon was quiet. No headphones, no conversation, no sleep, just a steady beat at his heart, echoing in his chest every time the plane trembled. Every little drop in turbulence made his stomach twist, and he wondered, what if this plane never lands? What if I never have to walk into that house again? But the plane landed, and like every other passenger, he stood, pulled his bag from the overhead, and walked off. But inside, he felt like a 6-year-old kid being dropped off at school for the first time, small, uncertain, and without a hand to hold. His brother picked him up, said nothing. His face was more hollow than Matthew remembered. No hug, no smile, just a quiet nod. The car they drove was their father's old sedan. Whether by accident or intention, no one said. The drive home was short, but to Matthew, every turn felt like a needle pressing into his chest. The street lamps, the old shops, even the barking dogs along the sidewalks, all conspired to pull him back into a version of himself he had spent years trying to bury. The old house appeared behind a line of trees. It hadn't changed much. The window still slanted. The curtains still faded. The walls still stained with old rain. No one waited at the door. No lights flicked on as the car pulled up, and what chilled Matthew most was how familiar it all looked. Like the scenes from dreams he never wanted to remember, where he opened the door and realized no one had been waiting for him. He doesn't remember whether he pushed the door open with his left or right hand. Only the feeling. His fingers were ice cold. The house was dim inside. The scent of old wood, a hint of mildew, and something else. Pie. Apple pie. He followed the smell like a spell. The kitchen appeared behind the wall, exactly like the picture he had spent years avoiding. The old wooden table. 6 chairs. Some wobbly. A long crack down the table's surface. Left there by his own hand, in a fit of rage at 12, after no one showed up for dinner. He sat down, laid his hand on the table, His skin was cold, but his palm was warm. A strange kind of warmth, like maybe, just maybe, this place once meant shelter. And he didn't know why his eyes burned, even though there was nothing to cry about. The pie sat at the center of the table, still warm. The smell of cinnamon and apple filled the air like a nameless memory. He didn't touch it, didn't eat, just stared. And in his mind, memories shattered like glass. Nights no one came home. Promises of, "I'm busy today," that never carried an apology. Questions never asked because everyone assumed, "He's fine." Matthew still couldn't remember the last time the entire family had dinner together. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe they only ever sat together in photo frames, never around a table. Now it was no different. He was still the only one sitting there. But he didn't leave. He placed a hand on the chair beside him, a small movement. Then the other hand rested on a spoon. One slow breath. And for the first time in 15 years, Matthew admitted something to himself. He was starving, not for food, but for something deeper, older, and far more stubborn than hunger had ever been. More than 10 years after leaving that house, Matthew stayed past the third night for the first time. Not because he had forgiven anyone, not because someone had asked him to stay, but because he realized what kept him there wasn't family. It was something that had gone unsaid for 30 years, now starting to stir. A hunger, not the body, not the stomach, but a part of himself that had been abandoned long ago. He sat in the old kitchen, facing the same table that hadn't changed since the day he left. 6 chairs, 3 cracks, and a wooden surface cold as untouched memory. No one told him to sit. No one asked what he was thinking. And perhaps that was exactly why he did. Outside, the wind howled. Tree branches scratched softly against the window like a child gently knocking, asking to be let in. Matthew didn't turn to look. He stared at his hands, as if seeing them for the first time. A small scar on his thumb, from a broken glass when he was 9, tried to wash dishes because Mom was working a night shift and Dad hadn't come home. Blood had dripped onto the tile. He cleaned it up. No one noticed. No one asked. No one had brought it up in the decades since. No one even knew. But Matthew remembered like it was yesterday. All those years in another city, he'd often thought, "I'm fine." He worked hard, lived quietly, avoided mess, no drama. Every day the same, neat, silent, controlled. He could walk through 5 city blocks, and not one person would remember his face. Sit in the same cafe every day and never hear his name. Part of him felt safe in that. But deeper down, he knew it was a controlled vanishing. If no one sees you, then no one can leave you. But this kitchen was a mirror he couldn't avoid. Every detail in it reminded Matthew of who he was. Not the man he had become, but the boy who waited a very long time for someone who never came. But this kitchen was a mirror he couldn't avoid. Every detail in it reminded Matthew of who he was. Not the man he'd become, but the boy who waited a very long time for someone who never came. When he was 12, he had spent an entire evening dressed in new clothes his mom bought, thinking they'd go out for dinner like his dad had promised. But Dad didn't come home. Mom came back late, exhausted, only managing, maybe next time. His sister was out with her boyfriend, his little brother too young to understand. And Matthew sat in tight leather shoes, arms folded on the table, not knowing when it was okay to take them off without looking stupid. He never brought that memory up again, not to anyone, not even to himself. But now it returned, whole, not dramatic, not cinematic, just a quiet, lonely piece of the past, like a scratch under the table's finish, unnoticed by others, but still aching when touched in just the right spot. He stood, walked to the old storage room. Dust coated everything. He flipped the light switch. On a shelf sat cardboard boxes he thought his mother had thrown away. One had his name on it, written in smudged blue marker. He didn't think. He pulled it down. Inside, doodles, a torn notebook, a few old schoolwork books, and an envelope unsealed. On the front, it read, "To Mom, you don't have to read this if you're busy." He opened it, the handwriting wobbly, childlike. The first sentence read, "I know you're tired, but I just want you to try eating with me once. If Dad doesn't come home, it's okay, but you can just sit with me." He paused. Sweat trickled down his back. His hands didn't shake, but his throat tightened like something was rising from his chest straight to his eyes. He folded the letter again, put it back in the box, not because he didn't want to keep it, but because he already had, for over a decade, inside his heart, he didn't need another copy. Back in the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon still lingered from the apple pie his mother had baked earlier that day. That scent was the only thing that had ever felt like home, not because it was delicious, but because it was the first time she baked not for anyone, not because of anyone, but maybe for something she couldn't put into words. Matthew opened a cabinet, took out 3 bowls, not full, not waiting for anyone, no pretending. He sat at the table again, this time not staring into the void, but at himself. And for the first time in over 3,000 dinners, he admitted that he had been deeply lonely, but had survived. Not because he was strong, but because even when left behind, he still waited. Even when no one asked, he still learned not to disappear. Even when unseen, he kept sitting through every version of his childhood, waiting for someone to knock on a door that had been locked for far too long. Matthew stayed through another winter. No one asked him to, no one stopped him, and most importantly, no one seemed surprised. It was as if everyone in the house instinctively understood. He wasn't there out of obligation anymore. He had chosen to stay, and that choice, quiet and unannounced, was the clearest turning point his life had ever known. On the first morning, when snow blanketed the old fence, Matthew opened the window, letting the cold wind drift through the house. The chill stung his eyes, but he didn't close it. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, his notebook already open. The first lines he wrote weren't memories. They were records of last night's dinner, of a slow conversation with his younger brother, of the way his mother had rested a hand gently on his shoulder as she passed by, without a word. No one said they understood each other now, but no one avoided it anymore either. Matthew began planting in the backyard. Nothing fancy, just a few rows of vegetables, some pots of basil and parsley, a couple tomato plants. At first, it was just a way to pass the time. But slowly, his hands learned to feel soil. With every handful of earth, every seed tucked into place, every watering, he felt like he was doing something for a tomorrow he could finally believe in. Just like the pain inside him, as a child, he had thought that if he stayed quiet long enough, needed no one hard enough, maybe he'd be allowed to stay. But now, Matthew understood staying wasn't a reward. It was a choice, one he had to make over and over again, every day. His mother never asked why he hadn't left. She simply handed him one of his father's old coats and said quietly, "This one's warmer." Matthew took it, didn't wear it right away, but hung it by the door, like something still waiting to be understood. One snowy afternoon, his younger brother brought home an enlarged photo, a restored version of an old family picture. Everyone's face was clearer now, and his younger self, once a blurry back turned away from the camera, had been carefully edited to face forward. He stared at the photo for a long time without speaking, then placed it on top of a cabinet, not on the wall, but not hidden away either. There were long, uneventful days. He read books, made tea, listened to the old radio his mother turned on every morning. But the strange thing was, for the first time in his life, he didn't feel guilty for the stillness. He no longer felt like he was wasting time, because he was inside it, fully, breath by breath. One evening, he passed the kitchen as his mom stirred a pot of soup. She asked, "Will you be eating tonight?" He answered, "I'll cook." No more was said. But that night, all three of them showed up at the table on time. He made something simple, pasta with tomato sauce and greens. But his mom brought out the good bowls. His brother poured the tea. And when they sat down, no one spoke loudly. No one turned on the TV. No one checked their phones. The meal passed in soft silence. But for the first time, no one left halfway through. Matthew didn't think it was anything extraordinary. But when he was washing dishes afterward, hands wet, eyes dropped to the damp counter, he noticed tears falling. Not many, but enough to know that something in him had been put down. Not erased, not forgotten, not gone, just placed down gently. A month later, Matthew signed up for a part-time job at the town library. The work wasn't demanding, but each time he sorted books, he felt something in his heart line up a little more. Old volumes returned to their rightful place, just like how he was slowly gathering pieces of himself, scattered memories, and putting them where they belonged, the past. No one brought up whether he would leave again, and at some point, he stopped asking himself, too. The following spring, his mother slipped in the garden. Nothing serious, but she needed care for a few days. Matthew took her to the hospital, held her steady down the porch steps. She leaned on his shoulder without hesitation. He didn't mind. He just thought, if, as a child, I had felt her hand on my shoulder like this, maybe I wouldn't have learned to flinch whenever someone got too close. The hospital was quiet. While waiting for results, she said, "I didn't think you'd come back." Matthew, eyes focused somewhere else, replied, "Neither did I." Silence. Then she turned to him. "Can you stay?" Not a plea, just a breeze of question, passing gently through a field. He nodded, didn't smile, but inside, something opened. The day she came home from the hospital, Matthew wheeled out the bike. She sat on the back, arms loosely around his waist. The way he used to carry his brother to school, the road home was short, but in his mind, it stretched the length of 33 years. That night, he lay in his old room, staring at the ceiling. No lights on, no headphones, no sleep mask. For the first time in many years, he let the darkness settle over him and didn't find it frightening. In that darkness, he thought about the child he used to be, the one who wrote a letter asking his mother to sit and eat dinner with him, the one who pretended not to be hungry, just so he wouldn't have to eat alone. And he smiled faintly. "You made it. You're here. I see you." He didn't believe he was fully healed, but he knew now nothing was pulling him away from the present anymore. The memories still lived. The wounds still ached, but they no longer screamed. They were quiet now, like darker patches of skin. Not gone, but no longer sore. The next morning, he walked into the garden, picked a few sprigs of fresh basil, opened the kitchen door, and for the first time, he made breakfast for the whole family, without needing a reason. No one was late. No one said no. Not because everything had changed, but because he had stayed. Matthew's story doesn't have a dramatic twist or a miracle arriving just in time. And that's exactly what makes it feel so deeply real. Because many of us have grown up in homes that seem complete. Yet we're missing something we couldn't name. A listening gaze, an always empty chair, a dinner that never felt whole. Matthew carried that silence with him for more than 30 years. He lived as if he was fine, until one day, instead of moving forward, he chose to stay. Not to reclaim anything, but to finally admit, I was lonelier than I ever allowed myself to say. The most meaningful part wasn't that everything got fixed. It was the quiet courage of one person, willing to return to stay, and to place the first chair at the table. The lesson in this story isn't forgive immediately, or make peace with your past. It's this: if there's still an empty space in your heart that no one has reached, you don't need to fill it with someone else. You just need to be present, right there, and stay. Thank you for staying until the very end of the story. Not everyone chooses to sit with something this slow, this deep, and this honest. If you saw a part of yourself in Matthew, or if you'd like to share this with someone who's ever felt lonely within their own family, please pass it on. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, consider supporting the channel by hitting like, subscribing, and turning on notifications. It's a small way you can help me keep telling the stories that aren't easy to speak, but are worth hearing. Once again, thank you for staying.